Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this program, Colombia's Outlook, Opportunities and Challenges for 2022. My name is Lina Delgado, Executive Director of the Colombian American Association. The Colombian American Association is the first binational chamber of commerce for Colombia, established in the United States. We are a private, non-for-profit business organization founded in 1927 in New York. The association purpose is to create great knowledge and understanding of Colombia. We seek to disseminate up-to-date information on economic, financial, and political matters, and to promote commercial and cultural ties among the people of the two nations. For today's program, I'm pleased to welcome Anwar Rodriguez, Vice President of ANIF, and Silvana Maya, Senior Analyst, Global Risk Analysis at Control Risk. This panel wouldn't be complete without Daniel Pacheco, General Editor at La Silla Vacía, who will moderate and lead the conversation. Anwar, Silvana, and Daniel, thank you for accepting this invitation to be part of this program. Also, I want to thank everyone who is virtually attending, and I hope you enjoy the program. Daniel, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Lina. Thank you for the Colombian American Association and for everyone that's watching. I'm a journalist. I'll be moderating this conversation from Bogota, where I think our two guests are also based. Silvana Maya is a senior analyst in Control Risk, which is a private risk balancing firm. She is a senior analyst based in Bogota in the Global Risk Analysis team. She's an expert in Colombian politics and security, and she has a dual BA in Law and Political Science from the Universidad de los Andes here in Bogota, and 2 master's degree, one in International Relations from King's College, and another in Public Policy, University of Oxford. Hi, Silvana, how are you?
Hi, Daniel, thank you very much, and thank you to the Colombian American Association for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
And Anwar Rodriguez, as Lina mentioned, is Vice President of ANIF. ANIF is a think tank in Colombia. Its origins are from the financial sector. It was like the financial sector think tank. Now it has a broader focus. It is kind of a center-right think tank. It is known in Colombia for making a lot of unpopular suggestions, like lowering the minimum wage and things like that. Anwar has almost 15 years experience in the public sector and in research. He is an expert in sustainability, fiscal impact, and the country's social programs. He was the director of sectorial financing in the Ministry of Health, and also a deputy director of health in the National Planning Department, the DNP. He actively worked in participated in the discussions for the formulation and approval of the recent National Development Plan, which is like President Duque's blueprint. How are you, Anwar? Hello, thanks for being here.
Hi, Daniel. Thank you for having me. Silvana, good morning, and everyone else. Thank you for the invitation from the Andean American Association.
And so you guys know, and everyone knows, this is a public conversation. It will be uploaded on YouTube. You can record your questions in the Q&A chat, and we'll be taking some of those in a while after we get a chance to talk to our panelists today. You know, 2022 outlook is the topic of the discussion. It's obviously a very political year in Colombia, but I first wanted to ask you, what is the state of public opinion of the economy and of the country in general going into these elections? So before we start talking about what's going to happen in the Congress and presidential elections, talk about a little bit about how you see the government, how your perspective of the economy and the political environment is right now. So maybe we can start with Silvana.
Thank you, Daniel. Yes, I think we are approaching the elections, and it's in a very interesting time. So some things to highlight: the GDP growth, the inflation rate, the interest rate increase, and the peso volatility. So after several lockdowns that started back in 2020 to fight the spread of the COVID-19 pandemic, and the nationwide protest that lasted at least 7 weeks, a worldwide supply chain crisis, Colombian economy suffered considerable during these last 2 years. And I know we're still waiting for the special data or the official data coming from the National Department of Statistics. But 2 days ago, the president sort of took a number and said that we grew 10.2% approximately. And I think this number has yet to be confirmed, but it is an important number. However, I think it is important to say that the economic recovery in Colombia, even though it is one of the best in the regions in 2021, we cannot just say that it is the higher economic growth in the last 10 decades at some economists or some
government officials mainly.
Yeah, they have pointed this out, but it is not entirely true, and considering that it came after the worst year in history in 2020. So we need to see things in perspective, and growth relatively to 2019 was only around 2.3%. So according to this data, we also need to see the fiscal deficit, and the fiscal deficit, according to the Ministry of Finance, was 7.1% of the GDP in 2021. So all these numbers are important to understand what we're going through. Also on the political side, we are having one of the worst populate or rated governments in the late history of the country. President Duque has not been very popular. His popularity, his image has been decreasing, even though he had a sort of a recovery in the last couple of months. Things are not going well, and this drives to a very interesting political atmosphere that is going to be shaping the things in the presidential campaign, and as well as congressional campaign, what we will see in the legislative elections in March, in just 1 month from now. So overall, we have also a very interesting crisis in the world. As I mentioned, the supply chain is definitely having some impacts on what we're seeing. Food has increased the prices. Inflation rate is, I think, almost 7%, something that we haven't seen in many years in Colombia. And I think Anwar can talk more about this specific data. But I think all this environment that we're seeing, especially right now, are shaping what will be a very intense political campaign, a very intense debate, and will also shape what the next government will receive, the kind of country that is highly indebted and that will definitely mark some social and economic agenda for the next government.
So Silvana's point is that outside of the rosy picture, government officials are painting, and where there are structural economic problems which Colombia has not resolved in many years, and that have become more important during the pandemic. Do you share that gloomy picture of the state of the country going into the elections?
Well, in this situation, there are for sure some problems that we need to take into consideration regarding the economic activity. Mainly, it will shape, as Silvana said, the central aspects for the next government. But we have to take into consideration that recovery and the recovery of the economic activity has been more positive than what every analyst, including the government officials, had at the times when we were coming out of the pandemic at the beginning of 2021, and the lockdowns and the strict measures that have been taken into consideration to slow the advance of COVID-19. So we have to take both sides of the situation into consideration. Right now, as we speak, the National Statistics Department is going to announce the official figures of the economic activity in 2021. We think that it's going to be a number close to what the president announced was the new estimates of the Ministry of Finance. In an if we have an estimation since October last year, that the GDP growth will be between 9.7 and 10.1%, which is really good, taking into consideration the crisis that we had last year in 2020, and the economic downturn, the highest in the history that we had on that year. When we started analyzing the data, we at the beginning we did not see getting to pre-pandemic levels only until 2022. With what we have been analyzing until now, we see that we have achieved pre-pandemic levels before that, even in the second semester of 2021, and that certainly is positive. And with the figures that the National Statistics Department will confirm in minutes, we will certainly see that. But we have to take into account other aspects. As Silvana mentioned, fiscal deficit, for sure, it's really important, and the government made an effort to develop a counter-cyclical fiscal policy that was clearly needed to minimize the effects of the pandemic. But we see that it is going to be certain that the next government, whichever candidate wins, will have to make a fiscal adjustment and will have to discuss fiscal policy as a center of their political views or priorities. Another thing is that we have to take into account that economic activity has recovered, but employment is not recovering at the same pace. So we need to take into account reforms to the labor market in order to recover the jobs that we have lost during the pandemic and that we are still to recover. So for sure, the labor market regulation and reforms is going to be another central aspect. And the last aspect that I want to point out is, as Silvana was saying, is this external deficit that we have. We have high levels of demand, both public and private. Silvana mentioned we have, and I also pointed out, we have high fiscal deficit based on the public expenditure that has been trying to take into account the effects of the pandemic, but we also have in the recovery a high private demand. So in this excess of demand is pushing the external deficit that we have right now. And if you see, we have high levels of volatility, but the peso is at high levels, even when the price of the petrol of the oil barrel is at historical levels. So that external deficit is what is driving our exchange rate, and it is going to generate additional pressure to the inflation that we are currently seeing right now. So to summarize, it is not such, we have to take into account like both aspects. There are positive aspects and there are some negative or some aspects that will need to be taken into account regardless of which candidate will win the elections, and we have to take them into account to analyze and to have a good prospect for 2022 and the following years.
Thank you, Anwar. So let's jump into the elections. I know there is a special interest in this year's Colombian elections. So I'll just lay out what the picture ahead looks like for the people and outside observers. So on the 13th of March, in about a month, we'll have congressional elections to renew both the Senate and lower chamber of Congress. All senators and all representantes, what they're called in Colombia, will be renewed. And that's how the Colombian Congress election works for 4 years. Also, and this is a change in how Colombian presidential elections are working, we'll have 3 primary elections representing the center left or left, and the center right or right in the country. There are around 18 presidential candidates only in those consultas presidenciales, in those presidential primaries for the center, the left, and the right. There are also some candidates, outside candidates, which are not running in those coalitions, and they'll go for the first round of presidential voting, which is due in May. If none of those candidates, which is foreseeable, wins a simple majority of the votes, 51% of the votes, will go for a runoff with the 2 candidates which got the most votes, and that runoff will be in June, at the end of June. So we'll have elections in March, the primaries and the congressional elections. In May, we'll have the first round. And the runoffs, if there are runoffs, will be held in June. This is sort of a new and evolving electoral outlook in Colombia, where primaries and presidential coalitions are now taking hold. That has created an abundance of candidates, which makes it very hard for inside observers, for citizens, and also for outside observers to understand what's going on. You might have heard of at least one candidate, which is Gustavo Petro, and I think this is the first time in Colombia's recent history where a center left or a left-wing candidate is polling high going into the elections. This is a first for Colombia after a peace process, after the demobilization of the FARC. And now I'll ask Silvana, in that context, let's talk about Petro. Let's start with him, and let's start talking about what do you think his real chances are, and what do you think the platform for change he's proposing means in the context of the center left or the left in Latin America.
Okay, Daniel, yes. As you explained, we are having a very interesting elections, and it's a complicated election because it's basically, we will have 3 rounds. So every round will be different. As you also mentioned, not everyone will participate in the first round. And I think Petro was wise enough to decide to run on his own team in Colombia Humana, and decided to participate in an inter-party consultation with his own teammates, because this gives him a lot of visibility that he needs to take the momentum that he's having right now and to extend it over the next couple of months. So that is first. And I think that what we are seeing is that he's a front runner. He doesn't need to fight against other candidates. Other candidates are fighting against him, but he's not fighting back. And I think this is something very relevant, especially when someone is on his position. He has taken every single advantage of the internal fights that other parties or other movements are having on his behalf, and he is doing the job very well. Also, and I think this is also important to mention, some of the things that the current government has been doing over the past 4 years has helped to shape his campaign. He has been in campaign for the last 4 years, not only for a couple of months as other candidates, but considering that he lost the elections back in 2018 in the second round against President Iván Duque, that gave him a lot of visibility, and that gave him the opportunity to plan the elections very wisely and very calmly. So he has been doing so, and he had an important momentum as well during the last protest in Colombia back in April last year, when he sort of led and presented himself as an anti-government option for the Colombians. and he understood the sentiment of crisis and the social discontent that was sort of being shown in the country. So he has been doing his homework, and he has been traveling around the country like no other candidates. And considering that even though he is competing against some interesting candidates in Colombia Humana, it's almost certain that he will win. There is no question to be asked there. So he will have not only the financial benefits that the state provides to those candidates who run in the inter-party consultations, but furthermore, he will have this visibility. I think we are seeing some polls that show him as a front runner, but we need to take these polls also very carefully, because some of these polls take all the candidates in like a single bag, and that's not entirely true. We see that other candidates from the center left or from the center right that are competing against each other, that we need to take just only one candidate will win all of these consultations, and they will then actually become a candidate that will fight against each other. So we need to take this carefully, and I think we cannot make many conclusions out of the polls. However, in my opinion, and what we have been discussing at Control Risk, is that it is very, very likely and almost a certain thing that Petro will reach the second round and will be presented. Probably he will even win the first round, but it is very unlikely that he manages to get the 50% of the votes, as you just mentioned. And I don't think that will be likely. So we will have a second round. Whomever gets to the second round against Petro, that will be another very different election. Why? Because the country, we have very conservative voters. That's also something that we need to point out. Traditionally, Colombians have voted right-wing in the last 5 or 6 decades, and that has not, maybe the only not so right-wing presidential or president that we had was Ernesto Samper, and that was a long time ago. But besides that, I think we have all the time had very right-wing candidates or presidents running this country. And this is not something that is changed so easily, despite the fact that what we are seeing in the region, and I will point out a bit later about this specific regional movement, but Gustavo Petro is facing a first chance in history to actually get into government and present a left-wing government in Colombia. However,
So let me stop you right there, and then we can talk a bit about what his left-wing government platform looks like, and maybe compare it to some regional examples so that people get a sense of how left-wing or not is he. I just wanted to ask Anwar, and trying to bring along some of the question. Gideon Long, Anwar asks if we've seen any evidence of the Petro effect, like people moving their funds out of Colombia. And I'll ask this like in the context of what Silvana was saying, is that we have a front runner. He is a clear front runner, but we also have a high level of uncertainty in the Colombian elections because there's a very big array of candidates, a dispersion. Polls aren't saying a lot of things. They're just saying that Petro has a consolidated position in the polls, but the center and the right have not consolidated. So it's hard to see how he would do really in a first round. Have you seen any evidence of the Petro effect? And that can give us a sense of whether the chance of him winning or the perspective of him winning is firmly held in the country or not.
Thank you, Daniel. I think that you mentioned the keyword more than the Petro effect. We have been suffering from the uncertainty and the increasing uncertainty that the elections and well, the recovery in itself during 2021 has had in the current affairs. So uncertainty it will have an effect on the economic trends that we see during 2022. Silvana made a clear analysis of what Petro is going to is representing in this couple of months, and what we will see during the next couple of months in the primaries to put a name to this first round of election, and then on the second round that will be a entirely different election based on who will face Petro in that second round, if we take into account what we are seeing right now. But going into the economic effects of the elections, we certainly see that we are having increasing levels of country risk. The differential to the safe interest rate bond of the US is increasing, and we are reaching levels similar to those in Mexico. But even though we have been having these increasing rates of the country risk, we see that the Colombian government and the Ministry of Finance is able to comply or to satisfy the financing needs right now. So we are financing what we need to, and we're getting international and national financing of the fiscal deficit. But the thing is that with the increasing levels of uncertainty, this could really change. If the outcome of the election increases those levels of uncertainty, and we in the Colombian elections choose a president that will change the economic model, most certainly we will have a different situation. If we, on the other hand, choose a candidate that will face the reforms that I mentioned before, we have a fiscal reform, a pensional situation that we need to address, a labor market reform, and as external sector that we need to take into account, that will calm the markets and the analysts, and in that sense we would have a different economic outlook. So
I'll just point out, Anwar, that I know economists and businessmen hate uncertainty, but from the political aspect, it's great that we have uncertainty, because maybe elections are about uncertainty and about different options. And for the first time, Colombia is facing an option which is clearly different from what we've known for a lot of decades. And in that sense, I think that there is some nervousness. But so there goes the question. Do you think, Silvana, that what Gustavo Petro is at least saying publicly right now, is it a change of model which should worry investors? Does it change the fundamentals of private property, democracy, stability in the legal framework of the country?
People are generally scared of what might happen because we don't know exactly how real his words are, but he has shown that he actually does what he says, and he showed us that when he was the mayor of Bogota. He's not a man of words, he's a man of action. So things should take very seriously. He has sent some messages that are worrisome for some sectors. The extractive sector is one of the best examples I can come up with. Because he has mentioned that he will not basically stop completely, but he will stop giving exploration licenses for both mining and both the extractive economies. And this is important because we are an economy based on oil exports. And as Anwar mentioned, we are seeing historic prices that are basically helping our economy. And given that we're having such an intense or high interest rates, this helps to balance what we're seeing in the economy. So this could be very problematic. Also, he mentioned
just to explain it, because he's Petro is hard to pin down, right? His proposals are a bit like slippery. So what he says is he proposes to stop new exploration contracts. He will respect current exploration contracts and current exploitation contracts. I don't know if I'm using the right words here, but so this is like a tough transition out of oil for a country which highly depends on oil.
Exactly. So basically what he said is we will respect the current licenses that exist. We will not sort of renegotiate the contracts because there are contracts and we cannot do that. But however, new explorations are taken out of the table and the environmental licenses process will be robust and will be more complicated, as well as any sort of prior consultation processes. And this is something that will make it very difficult for the extractive industry to even take the chance to open the door to have new investments. So basically, if some mining company has a contract, that they are not on threat, not necessarily, but new investors are not welcome. That's kind of the message. And there are other aspects that might scare some other businesses. For instance, he had mentioned about increasing the tariffs on import products. And this could be also very complicated for many industries in the country. This is not basically, or this does not address a specific industry, but rather all of us. All should be sort of asking themselves what could happen, and especially considering the high interest rate. If you take into account that in agriculture, for instance, if some of the agriculture need something specific to be imported that is going to have a tariff, then this will increase the price in the entire chain, even going back to the final buyer. So for us as citizens, when we try to buy something, we'll see an increase in prices. And this is what other economists and other candidates have been pointed out, because this is a dangerous intervention in the economy that should not be sort of, or the market should not be intervening in this particular way.
And there are other maybe two sectors which have been involved in some of Gustavo Petro's proposals that I think, Armon, you know very well: the health and the pension sector. I think that there are big proposals for reform in both, where there are, especially in the pensional funds, there are big private savings which are being like, there's a proposal to take them into the public spending system, and there is some worry there, right? And what?
Sorry. No worries. Before answering that particular question, I want to take a central aspect of Silvana. She was mentioning the proposal to finish exploration, new exploration contracts, and what's important and what most people don't have into account is that the mining industry and the oil production and extractive industry has two additional aspects. It is a revenue generator for the central government, and it's a generator for resources for the departments and the subnational government. Those resources from the royalties are the main resource that the subnational governments have to finance social projects in the health sector, in the education sector, infrastructure, sanitation and water supply. And to say that we can we can have an energy transition in a short term is really not responsible, because even in a term between 5 and 10 years will be really will be entirely difficult to replace what those products generate for the Colombian economy. Also, Silvana has a pinpoint detail on the tariffs that will definitely increase prices and will hurt all of the consumers. What we need for our economy is to open more our economy, export more products, more non-traditional products, and that tariffs and those efforts to close our economy will certainly hurt consumers and would drive prices up, as Silvana was saying, which is what not only Gustavo Petro is proposing, but other candidates are taking into account. And going into
and what I think that's a key point is that the political debate in the elections have shifted definitely to the left. Even center candidates like Sergio Fajardo, people who you would have pinpointed maybe even to the center right a few years ago, are going with protectionist proposals in terms of the especially importation of basic goods like food and stuff like that.
Exactly, and as I said earlier, when we have external deficit and a trade balance, a trade unbalance to say so, it's really worrisome that we have those kind of proposals, because we need to make our production of national products more competitive, and the only way to do so is to open up the economy, to have a stronger economic policies to mainly seek to balance that trade deficit, and to have a local productive sector that generate the jobs that we lost during the pandemic. So,
but there we're going into a policy discussion, but because on the other hand, we could argue that we have a high exchange rate in Colombia, and our non-traditional exports have grown very, very little in the past few years. And so let's not go into that policy discussion. I want to keep this political. So going outside of Gustavo Petro, a lot of what the next president will want to change or have to change will have to go through Congress. Is this new tide of insatisfaction, of the want for change, will it permeate the new Congress, Silvana?
Yeah.
There is a chance, for example, for a new majority, a different majority? Sorry.
I don't think we will have a definite majority in the Congress. I think we will have a very fragmented Congress. We will see many different parties represented in Congress, but we will see a renovated Congress, not entirely. I mean, some of the old school politicians will reach Congress again, but we will see some new faces that are somehow a response of what we have seen of this social discontent and this sort of emotional feeling about we're tired of the traditional politicians. And I think one important aspect to mention here, Daniel, that we haven't mentioned at all is corruption. People are absolutely tired about corruption. And this has been one of the main points in the debate. Corruption, and we have seen some other presidential candidates that have been sort of this anti-establishment corruption.
Let's name him, because I think it's important to name him and to introduce him to outside investors. So this guy who's called Rodolfo Hernandez, he's a construction entrepreneur. He says he's made $100 million. So he is kind of our Colombian Trump. He's also a senior citizen. He's 76 years old. He was the mayor of Bucaramanga, which is Colombia's 6th largest city, the capital of the 10th.
Yeah.
Of Santander.
Yeah.
And he speaks his mind. He's he looks like he sounds like a populist, right? An entrepreneurial populist, Silvana.
Yeah, he's a right-wing populist, and he is a master of the communication, we have to say. He's a success in TikTok. He reaches out to population between 18 and 23 years old. He's very popular among women, which is also a surprise. And he has been driving this anti-corruption agenda. I have to say he's not the only candidate with this rhetoric. There are some others. Ingrid Betancourt has also taken this sort of importance of fighting corruption. But I think it's also relevant to say that in basically in all the polls that we have seen so far, where people get asked what are the most worrisome problem or the biggest challenge in this society, in our political conditions right now, is corruption. People are tired of corruption. So I think this has to be taken seriously, and this has been taken advantage of someone like you mentioned, Rodolfo Hernandez, which is our Colombian Trump. Yeah, that's how we have framed him.
And just to summarize the question where we started, what is your outlook on Congress? So we can like...
Yeah, so I think Congress also responds to this anti-corruption statement of the society, but what we'll see is basically a very fragmented Congress. We will see some punishment votes against some of the traditional parties. For instance, the Democratic Center, the Uribe's former President Uribe's party will be punished, will lose some of the Senate seats. We will also see some, for instance, Partido de la U will also lose some of their seats. And I think the left-wing movement, Colombia Humana, will be very strong in Congress. However, they will not have a majority. So what we will see is sort of, they will need to play together in some of the projects and some of the big reforms, because they cannot do it alone. I mean, no one could do it alone. This, regardless of who gets to power, will need to get support from other parties to get those very important reforms, like Anwar mentioned, the pension reform, the health reform, the justice reform, will need to have the support of many parties.
And in this scenario of the populist tide for the presidential elections, mainly with Rodolfo Hernandez, who I think is outside Gustavo Petro, the other person who is like making a name for himself in this election. We will know a lot more about what's going on after the 13th of March when we have the primaries. Do you find the populist tide worrisome for business or not so much? Because we had like Donald Trump in the United States was pro-business. He lowered taxes for business. There was a big reform there. Do you have the same worries for Rodolfo Hernandez as with Gustavo Petro?
Well, I think, and this is taking into account what we discussed in previous question, is that I think that this kind of populist approach to the economy, whether it is through tariffs, closing up the economy, closing up the extractive sectors, focusing on only fighting corruption and not taking into account the need of a fiscal reform, those kind of proposals, whether they are from the left or from the right, are worrisome, because those are the ones that are going to define the economic outlook of the country during the next years. The discourse or the main points that Rodolfo Hernandez is having of fighting corruption, and with the fight of with this fight or with this reduction of the corruption levels, we will not need to have a fiscal reform, is basically
you can say it, nonsense.
No, it's an omission, because it is not tackling the structural aspects that we need to pass through Congress and to have these central discussions for the good of the country and for the good of the economy. To say that, well, corruption, we are all against corruption, that is for sure. We all have to fight corruption, but to say that fighting corruption will make the next government not need to have a tax reform and have an increase of revenue is an important omission that not only he is taking into account in his proposals, but other candidates are also taking into account. So okay. I guess to summarize, these kind of populist proposals are dangerous, whether they are from the left or whether they are from the right.
So this is a guy who slapped a city councilman in the face in his office, and that just made him more popular. We have like 80 people in the panel. We can take a lot of your questions. Just put them in the Q&A chat. I have Johnny Hurtado here, who asks if there are technological tools to monitor democratic processes and also to monitor the use of resources in detail. I think the DNP, the Department of National Planning, has good tools for tracking spending. Anif, do you have those?
Well, the National Planning Department has made as you said, Daniel, a whole system to track subnational level, subnational government level, and the use of the royalties, the use of the general like transfers that the central government has and gives to the municipalities and departments. We can use that tools to monitor how subnational governments behave before and after elections. That could be an approach to use those kind of tools. But besides that, if we don't have any additional tools other than the official statistics that the National Planning Department or the National Statistics Department have, or I don't know if Silvana have.
Okay, and I have here another question. This is a question which I think reflects the level of uncertainty in the Colombian elections. So this is an anonymous question. Can Gustavo Petro affect Colombian institutional traditions in Congress, central bank, justice courts if he has a majority in Congress with alliances? He would have to pull through constitutional amendments, which are hard to pull through. They were hard for this government, which I think managed to do what? The thing with the pena, cadena perpetua, the lifelong sentences for rapists and child killers, which was then brought down by the Constitutional Court. So I think we have good counterbalances in power. Of course, those have been tested in the past by Álvaro Uribe, who managed to change the constitution to get reelected once. But even him, with high levels of popularity, which Gustavo Petro has never held, couldn't do it to stay for another third period. I have another question by Silvana's former boss, Raúl Gallego. But if Hernandez were to face Petro in the second round, don't you think it would make it potentially easier for Petro to win? The central left would presumably support Petro rather than someone seen as Uribe light. What do you think, Silvana?
I think on the contrary, I think that it could actually take the entire country that does not support Petro in favor of the candidate like Rodolfo Hernandez. And it could be possible if we face that situation in the second round, that Rodolfo Hernandez could be our next president. I think the anti or the vote against the left, the hard left, like Gustavo Petro represents, could be very intensified in one single candidate that could be Rodolfo Hernandez. This could also happen with someone representing the center. Is less likely if it's someone very close to Uribe. That's when I think that Petro has the best chances to win. Like if we face another situation very similar to what we had back in 2018. But if we have someone populist on the left, populist on the right, I think the populist on the right will win.
Yeah, so this, and I would add there that it's hard to pinpoint Rodolfo Hernandez as a right-wing populist. Right, I know he's hard to pin as he's a populist. He's as an anti-establishment candidate. So I think, and I would agree with Silvana there, Raúl, that I think Rodolfo Hernandez is one of the few candidates that can subtract votes from Petro in the anti-establishment proposals that the country wants and the direction that the country wants to take.
Daniel,
I don't know one where.
With the appointment of the new vice president formula of Rodolfo Hernandez, I think the message is different. I think the message is I am the right, and I want to take votes from the right because Paolo Ochoa is from the right, and I think he's trying to take votes out of Uribismo, out of Oscar Iván Zuluaga, that's not a big threat, and even out of the movement of Equipo por Colombia, that is the center right. So I think he's playing his cards very wisely.
Anwar, do you want to chip in there, or you want to pass?
I think Silvana answered with more, every detail possible. So
so let's we have the 10 minutes left, so let's talk about what's happening to the right. Colombia's most popular leader of the 21st century, and I would argue that maybe even the second half of the 20th century, was Álvaro Uribe Vélez. He is not running for office to the Senate for the first time. He's being investigated for the crime of manipulating witnesses in a case against him. What's going on? What's going on in the sense of the pendulum moving? Is it moving along the way that it's moving in Latin America? Is this an exceptionality in Colombia, Silvana?
Well, we cannot forget our past. We have our past of the internal conflict against the FARC and against the ELN, and that has some importance still, regardless of what's happening in the region. That is also important. We have a tendency to not move left because that sort of brings us backwards. We have the sense that it is supporting the guerrillas movements that we had for more than 60 years, an internal conflict that still it's running, and that still is getting a security environment very bad, and the situation is not getting better. But I think that the government of Iván Duque has been bad in so many ways that people are also tired of what we're seeing. I think that the intention of introducing a tax reform on one of the worst social crises that Colombia has went through in the past 10 years sort of reaches a level of disappointment, a level of unsatisfaction, that people are just saying, I don't want this anymore. But we still have a very conservative amount of people that defends what Uribe did in his 2 terms, and that defends the project of security that Uribe so much defend and fought for. So I think that we have a balance. I think that what we're seeing in other countries like Chile, for instance, the Boric vote, or what we're seeing in Peru, that is a bit confusing right now, still with the Castillo's presidency, definitely gives some ideas that the entire region is going to the left. Argentina is also, Brazil will face elections in November, and is most likely Lula is going to win again. So we are seeing this sort of pendulum going to the left. But Colombia is a very right-wing country, if I can say so. And I think it's very difficult. And for this reason, I believe that the center still has a shot on getting a chance to govern the country, because it shows us a different movement. It shows us a different opportunity that is not either one of the 2 extremes that we are trying to avoid.
And Anwar, I might have gone like over the question of if Colombia's institutional counterbalances of power are strong enough to manage a populist or a left-wing authoritarian figure. What do you think?
Well, we are seeing it right now because we have high inflation pressures, and we have seen prices rise based on the international effects on the supply side and the supply disruption of containers and commerce. And we have seen local effects as well, the excess of demand. And the central bank has responded with an adequate increase on the interest rates to balance the increase of prices. In that perspective, we also saw that the government officials were announcing a prudential approach to this new monetary policy, and the central bank was really in a position to increase 100 basic points and to surprise most of the analysts, which is a clear signal of their independence, of what are the things that they are taking into account to take this kind of decisions. And I guess that is a strong institutional framework that will be difficult to change. The central bank, the balance of powers, the courts, the Congress, etc. Both are institutions that could be make things balanced and have balance and counterbalance to the legislative.
At least they make everything hard in Colombia. So, they make it hard through like legal frameworks. I would just add there that Iván Duque is maybe the first president in history to be able to renew the whole board of the central bank. Because of several changes, people going out to find new jobs. The whole central bank board was basically named by the center-right government of Iván Duque. We have an attorney general who will go 2 years into the next presidential term. And we have a figure which is called the procurador, like on an ombudsman who will also go 2 years into the next presidential period. And they're both very close to the current president, Iván Duque. Silvana, you wanted to add
Daniel,
something
this is
there?
why we have to split the next presidential run in two. The 2 first years will have more institutions sort of working in the check and balances system. We will have definitely an independent central bank and on all the institutions that you mentioned that are sort of appointed by Duque or on Duque's team will be there for 2 years, but the next 2 years will be more about what's going to happen with these 3 specific elections. And we also have the Constitutional Court. We cannot forget about the Constitutional Court, that we will see a replacement of 6 out of the 9 judges will be replaced in the next 4 years. And this is important because the president will have an opportunity to select one of the 3 people that run into this process for 6 of the positions out of the 9 judges. So this might change in the term that the next president is going to have, regardless of who is going to be in this position. But the institutions that we have that are strong right now could change in the next couple of years.
Yeah, constitutional magistrates are elected by Congress. They're appointed by different institutions. One of them is the president, who can appoint, he can't appoint, he can nominate 3 candidates. And also for the central bank board, the next president will not, in paper at least, should not be able to change more than 2 board members, right, Anwar? I think 2 of 7.
Yes,
so we're almost out of time. I think Michael's call has an interesting question here that I don't want to miss, is how does the Venezuelan catastrophe affect the upcoming Colombian elections? I would start by saying that anti-Venezuelan sentiment is running high in these elections. So I think after a long period of assimilation, anti-Venezuelan sentiment is running high in Colombia. And there is some recovery in Venezuela. I don't know what you guys think, Silvana.
I believe that the speech about Colombia turning into a Venezuela is no longer that powerful. I think we overcome that specific rhetoric, and it's good because that's not going to happen. But I think the crisis itself is affecting. I think that's, if we want to be fair, one of the things that Duque did well in his government was the protection of the Venezuelan immigrants in Colombia. However, the anti-Venezuelan sentiment, the xenophobia sentiment, unfortunately, is growing, especially with the situation of insecurity in the cities. And even though I believe it's going to be important in the political agenda, I don't think it's going to be one of the main topics, not anymore.
Okay, And Sam Sikan has a question. I think, Anwar, you could answer it. Is have any of the candidates specifically targeted proposed changes to foreign investment capital inflows into Colombia? Guys, remember, this is a campaign which is just starting. We have like 20 candidates, so a very detailed proposals are still not very defined, but maybe you can say something there, Anwar.
No, Daniel, we have not heard any specific proposals in that sense. The economic advisor team of the candidates are not that visible yet. I guess we will see more real proposals by March 13, when we have a more clear picture of who are going to be the candidates that are going to face this first round. By then, we will have economic proposals, and we will analyze all of them in an eve, and we will be providing input for international and national voters so that they can make their own decision regarding who will be or who will have the better proposals and those that are needed for the future of the country. Daniel, just to finish, the National Statistic Department has just announced the official growth rate. It is 10.6% for 2021.
Wow. So there is still a lot of resiliency in the Colombian economy. Besides it's like a structural, huge problems, debt, a fiscal imbalance, the account imbalance also. I think we're out of time. I would just point you out, if you're Spanish, if you read in Spanish, check out lasillavacia.com's political coverage. We have a good coverage of what's going on in Congress and in the presidential elections. And thank you very much to Silvana Maya and to Anwar Rodriguez. Silvana works in Control Risks. Anwar is the vice president of ANIF. And thank you for Lina for the invitation to speak to you here in the Colombian American Association.
Thank you, Anwar, Silvana, and Daniel for giving us this great panel discussion. I know that is so many other questions that our attendees would like to ask, especially regarding the presidential election. So we are hosting and we are organizing more programs regarding this topic. Also, I want to thank all the team of the association for helping us to make this event possible. Thank you all the participants, and I look forward to having you on our next program again. And thank you again to the panelists, that it was a great discussion. Hope to see you soon again. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.